Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You know, it is a risky, dangerous business to ask a professor to give something called the last lecture. I could have prepared hours worth of pithy advice for you, but Mark has given me very strict time parameters, so I will be responsibly brief. And I have really for you just 3 pieces of advice. But they're 3 pieces of advice that have stood me in good stead over many years in the corporate world, the academic worlds, and I hope they will have some benefit for you. So the first is this: accelerate into the curves. Accelerate into the curves. Now, what do I mean by that? The first time I heard that phrase, I was driving my brand new Mazda Miata on Coastal Highway 101 in California between Ojai and Santa Barbara, and that road is nothing but curves. And every time I got to a curve, I intuitively slowed down a little bit, backed off the pedal. But a friend of mine who was riding, and a very experienced driver, said, "Wrong, accelerate into the curves. Otherwise, you're going to totally lose momentum and grind to a halt." Over the years, I've come to think about that phrase much more metaphorically. And I truly believe that in times of uncertainty, it's absolutely the wrong time to hold back. Now, in just a few weeks, some of you will be graduating. Some of you know exactly what you'll be doing. But for some of you, I expect these are uncertain times. Will you find a job? Will you get into graduate school? Will you find true love, your kindred spirit? Will you have to live with your parents for the next 10 years? That's a joke, people. It won't happen. It won't happen, trust me. I believe that being at a crossroads is the most tenuous of times. When times are good, we celebrate. When times are bad, we cope. Certainly COVID has taught us that, if nothing else. But it's times when we can't see around the bend in our immediate road that are the most frightening, the most frightening. So when I'm at a crossroads, whatever it is, personal, professional, I make an extra effort to gather up all of my acquired skills, my various resources, and most importantly, my compassionate connections, family, friends, colleagues, the people who will have your back. This is when you will rely on them the most. My second piece of advice is equally simple, but not so easy to do. Welcome change. Welcome change. Intuitively, we resist change. Let me give you an example. If I said you could have a chip in your arm that would memorize every lecture that you've ever heard, so you wouldn't have to commit it to memory, how many of you would go for the chip? Raise your hand. How many would not? Most. I'm not offering. But we resist change because it's frightening. That's why we have rituals and traditions and trends, because they're the things that we count on day after day. But change is really the only thing that you can count on. This year, we celebrate the 32nd anniversary of the World Wide Web. We celebrate the 17th anniversary of Facebook. 7 years ago, we were invited to celebrate the first commercially sold pair of Google glasses, making virtual reality a reality. Scientists predict in the next 25 years we'll have hydroponic farms in Lake Michigan, that will have off-planet space colonies, that computers will create art as compelling as that done by humans, that's already happening, that we'll be able to control the weather. But whatever comes, I challenge you to embrace whatever serves all of humanity and to reject whatever diminishes us. When my mother was 92 years old, she turned to a dinner companion and asked, "What exactly is www.com?" That's the quintessential example of lifelong learning. And I know that you now, here, after 4 years at Adrian College, are ready for that journey. My third and final piece of advice is simple say, and even harder to achieve. And that is, live in the moment. Live in the moment. Hopefully you can learn from the past, dream for the future, but really all you have is right now, this very minute. And how you experience that moment matters. So you can almost predict what I'm going to say. I know you need to text and Twitter and post, that your avatars need to slay dragons, that you need to manage your crops, herds on Farm Bill, and crush candies to get to the next level. And all of these are harmless enough diversions. But I want to challenge you to sometimes put those aside and simply be in the moment. Unplug. There's a wonderful sign in a diner in Jackson, Michigan, across from the Jackson train station. It says, "We have no Wi-Fi here, talk to somebody." You should hear that as a joke, people. It's not a criticism. Now, I never thought I'd quote Morgan Freeman and Johnny Depp in my last lecture, but their thoughts echo my own about the surging role of technology in our lives. The two play starring roles in a fairly recent movie titled Transcendence, in which a doctor uploads his brain into a computer. The cast revealed their own thoughts about that topic. So Johnny Depp says, "I really don't pay much attention to things like Twitter because technology can be like a gun. It isn't a good thing or a bad thing. It's what people do with it." In my communications class, I like to use the example of a hammer. A hammer is a tool that can be used for good or ill. It can be used to build a house for Habitat for Humanity, or it can be used to bludgeon someone. Technology is like that. It is a value-neutral tool, but how we use it is what counts. You know perfectly well. Social media can be used to bully or befriend. It can be used to stay in touch, or it can be used to destroy. Johnny Depp goes on to say, "People can play God with technology. You can transfer every cent from the Bank of England to an account in Syria. You really can't avoid it, and it's great to have things like smartphones, but the technology is reshaping itself radically every day, and it's part of our lives." We talked about that throughout the movie. Does technology bring out something that's lying dormant in us? When Depp travels to shoot a movie, he takes two things: his guitar to kill time, and a portable typewriter. He says that the latter is for communication that matters. He loves everything about it, how long it takes, the care needed to choose each word, and he claims that he would use sealing wax every time if only it were more readily available. Morgan Freeman asks some of the same questions. He says, "Everyone has a smartphone. I have a computer. My car's a computer. My plane's a computer." But the chemistry of life itself is not being considered in this whole equation. Looking into the eyes of a beautiful woman and falling in love. What happens if your consciousness were uploaded? If you no longer have the chemistry of life itself, then what do you have? Now, please, please do not hear me exhorting you to abandon technology. On the contrary, I'm as addicted to my iPad and my phone as anyone else, but I am saying use it for the common good and find plenty of time in your lives to live in the moment, to live unplugged. So these are my 3 pieces of advice. Very simple. Accelerate into the curves, welcome change, live in the moment. I want to close with the words of one of my favorite children's authors, A.A. Milne. He puts these words into the mouth of Christopher Robin, who's speaking to his beloved Winnie the Pooh. But really, these are the words of a father watching his son leave childhood behind forever. Here's what he says. If ever there is a tomorrow when we're not together, there is something you must always remember. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. But the most important thing is, even if we're apart, I'll always be with you. And Adrian College will always be with you, and we wish you Godspeed. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Ask me anything. Yes?
Can you give an example of a time that you embraced change in your life and it benefited you greatly?
Would you repeat your question for me?
Can you give us an example when you embraced change in your life and it benefited you?
Great question, thank you. Yes, I'll tell you the first thing that comes to mind. I spent my entire undergraduate and graduate education straight through a doctorate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I studied linguistics, sociolinguistics, and I had 0 business courses, not one. And when I finished my degree, I was looking for a job teaching linguistics in a college, and I had one offer, one. There were no jobs at the time, and there were 200 applicants for every job that there was. But I had one single offer. It was to go to Harvard and teach for 1 year for the princely sum of $12,000. Now, no one could live in Cambridge, Massachusetts for $12,000 a year, but you were supposed to go for the glory of it. So when I went through that process, I thought, you know what I've been preparing for all these years is not going to happen right now. And totally serendipitously, I met the woman who founded American Girl, Pleasant Rowland. How many of you know American Girl? Of course you do. Man, the only thing you need to know about it is that 15 years after its inception, it sold for $700 million to Mattel. But when I met Pleasant, that was her name, she was just thinking about American Girl, and it was my privilege and honor to work with her and figure out how that business should be run. And the single skill I had that was applicable was that I could write. And so I had to 180 degrees rethink. The business world never, ever entered my mind as a path forward. But once I got started with that, I never looked back. And so, you know, sometimes when I'm advising, students will say, you know, I know I've wanted to be a hedge fund manager since I was in the 3rd grade. And those are the students that I worry about the most, because you have no idea what opportunities there will be a month from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now. They may be exactly in the field that you think you want to go in, or they may be something totally far afield. So that was life-changing for me. And it was a powerful lesson in staying open to things that you don't even know about yet. Great question, thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
Having worked at these institutions, is there anything about Adrian College that stands out to you as a faculty member?
Yes, absolutely. I went to a lot of big schools, and I mean a lot. Michigan, Syracuse, Florida State, Madison. And my single regret about my education is that I didn't go to a school like Adrian for my undergraduate degree. And I'll tell you why. And it's why I came here, frankly. Remember, I had the dream of teaching many, many years ago, but it only came to fruition here. And I had the option of going to two, one Ivy League and one Big Ten. But I chose Adrian probably for some of the same reasons that you did. I like knowing that if Jason Stone isn't in my class at 10:30 in the morning, maybe I should check up on him, right? Find out what's going on. I think that this is a singularly dedicated student body, partly because of its composition, partly because of where you come from. It has, for its size, a bit of international flair, which is important. If I could wish one thing for all of you, it would be that you, at some point in your relatively near future, go to a developing country, a third world country. It will forever change your perspective on not only the United States, but the world. I was so fortunate in my corporate lives at American Girl, Patagonia, and corporate Williams-Sonoma to ultimately work in 23 different countries. And every place I went to a farmer's market and a grocery store. That told me more about the culture probably than anything else. But if you can go to a developing country, so many things that we take for granted are aspirational for much of the world. And I think that the similarity, the analogy that I want to draw here is that I think Adrian College has a student population that is eager to learn, respectful, definitely not entitled, doesn't feel entitled, and those are all important things in keeping your mind open. Great question, thank you. Other questions? Yes, please. You might have to take your mask down and just shout at me. I think if you don't know exactly what you want to do, I actually see that as a good place to be, but I would talk to everyone that you know, family, friends of the family, who might be involved in different categories of work. And ask, this is important, ask to have with some of those people what are called informational interviews. In other words, you're not looking for a job, you're not looking for an internship. And I loved it when people asked me for informational interviews because they would ask things like, well, what is it like to be an international marketer? And then I could talk about that without any fear that they were hoping that in turn I was going to hire them. So definitely I would sample a lot of things. And the other thing I would say is that almost any entry-level job you can learn something from. You can find out what you're good at, what you like, what you don't like, and you have this window of opportunity when you start something new, maybe 3 weeks, probably a month at the outside, when you can see it without being vested in it. And you will probably see it the most clearly. And it doesn't take very long to say, this resonates for me or this doesn't. But I think those of you who have had me will laugh. I think your Rolodex, your contacts, is the single most important asset you'll take away from this school. Not individual facts that you memorize for a test on Thursday morning, but the people you have met and the worlds they represent. And take advantage of those. Absolutely. Does that answer your question? I hope so. What other questions? Yes?
What's the one thing you want our generation to change?
Oh boy. And I say boy advisedly. I want you to change gender inequity. I really do. And I think it's up to your generation, and I think you have the best chance of it. It remains a huge impediment to progress in the world. Where else, under what other circumstances, would you essentially dismiss 50% of your talent base, right? You would never do that. And yet, let me give you a really specific example. I was in Japan negotiating a sourcing deal for corporate Williams-Sonoma. We were going to import some things. And in Japan, they line up your business cards according to your rank. So I was the vice president, and then I had a buyer, and then I had a designer. So when we handed over our cards, they lined them up in that way. My counterpart, now this was 20 years ago, so not maligning the current Japanese business world, but as recently as 20 years ago, my counterpart could not bring himself to speak to me directly. He would direct all of his comments to my male buyer. The translator would translate. I would speak back to him. He would speak to the buyer. It would be translated. And you know, this kind of thing used to absolutely get to me, you know, blood pressure through the roof. But ultimately I decided my job here is to get it done. And if this is what it takes, so be it. But gender inequity is definitely one thing I'd like to see you fix. And then I'd like to see you fix our relationship to planet Earth and climate change. You know, my generation has totally botched that, and so is the next one, frankly. Didn't take it seriously, didn't think it affected us. And I guess part of that, fixing that, is thinking globally. We are one world. We are not one country. We are one world. And the sooner we come to grips with that, I think the more you'll be able to solve. You'll be able to solve. Love the question, thank you. Perfect setup for me. He wasn't a plant, I promise. But had I known ahead of time, I would have. Other questions? Yes, please.
If you could do like one last thing in your life, what would it be?
If I wanted to do one last thing, I'd like to stand in a field of tulips in the Netherlands. I've been to Amsterdam many times, and the first time I landed there, I have to tell you, I got off the plane, and I mean, look at this hair, right? Is this not Dutch hair? Straight as can be. For years, I spent a fortune on getting perms, and finally, my sister one year broke the harsh reality to me that I looked like a morel mushroom. So ever since then, I've gone to this, but you know, I got off the plane in Amsterdam and I looked around and I thought, everybody here looks just like me. I couldn't believe it. It was fabulous. You know, there are still places I'd love to go. even though I've been extremely fortunate in travel destinations, but I haven't been to New Zealand. I haven't been to Denmark. Those are two places I'd like to go. But really, if I had to pick one thing, it would be to stand in midst of those millions of tulips. Any other questions? Yes? In travel? Well, I'd say the most life-changing was to travel to Patagonia, which is at the southernmost tip of Argentina. And Yvon Chouinard, who started Patagonia, took about 15 of us there to do 100-year strategic planning. Literally, he wanted to plan out Patagonia's future for long after he and his wife Melinda are gone. And we had to climb to the base camp of a mountain called the Fitzroy. And if you know the Patagonia label, it's a mountain range, and the highest peak is the Fitzroy. And Yvon and 3 of his friends did the first ascent of that mountain. So as part of this trip, we had to climb to the base camp, and I do remember vividly thinking, I can't believe that climbing to a base camp is part of my job description, right? It was just unbelievable. I learned how to wear crampons and walk on glaciers. I learned to fly fish. But mostly what I learned from that trip was that of the 15 of us, I thought he would be the leader. He was always at the back of the line, always. And you know, we were layered up in all that Patagonia gear, capelline, cinchilla, etc. He wore chinos and a denim jacket and tennis shoes. And when the other climbers, the young climbers on the mountain, heard that he was there, they just descended on us. And he made us trade the clothes that we were wearing for the young climbers' clothes so that we could take their stuff back to the lab and test it. So I've never forgotten that, what I learned about leadership, which doesn't always mean being in the front, and what I learned about, you know, he really only cared what maybe 3 personal friends in the world thought about what we were going to develop next, and those were his climbing buddies. Good question, thank you. But any place you go, any place is so instructive in how humans spend their lives. And in some cases, you have to do what we call suspend your disbelief. Suspend your disbelief. I had to do that in places like India, Jakarta, Taiwan. It's just a different framework. You also have to be willing to eat things like eel, which not recommending it personally. Any other questions? Thank you so much. It was a privilege to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Ellsworth, for agreeing to participate. Really quick, before you guys leave, we have the certificates and medallions for graduating seniors and certificates and pins for any current members. If you didn't receive it when you walked in, go ahead and come up to the stage. Everyone else, thank you very much for coming. Just a reminder, President Docking's talk is April 16th in here again at noon. Thank you.
Thank you. It was fun. Wonderful turnout.
thank you enough. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.